When you ask people what edge compute is, you get a range of answers. Cloud compute and DevOps with devices and sensors, the semiconductors outside the data center, including connectivity, AI, and a security strategy. It's a stew of technologies that's powering our vehicles, our buildings, our factories, and more. It's also filled with fascinating people that are passionate about their tech, their story, and their world. I'm your host, Pete Bernard, and the Excelsior Show makes sense of what edge compute is, who's doing it, and how it can transform your business and you. So let's get started. But I think these days people people kind of get into their ecosystem, and then all their stuff kind of works, and then it's like, don't touch it.
Exactly. And then when you have to, having upgraded the computer is such a hassle, isn't it? And then having gone through the hassle and the bloody thing doesn't work, it's really more annoying.
I know. Yeah, you said you spend a lot of time on it, but well, I'm glad to connect.
Yeah,
I know it's afternoon there and it's morning here,
right.
So that's good. And it's about I'm here in Bellevue, Washington. Where are you?
I am
dialing in.
I'm dialing in from about 25 miles south of London, so in a town called Guildford, so just south of London.
Oh yeah, Guildford. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Have you spent?
I worked for a company, Phoenix Technologies, that was a BIOS company.
Okay.
Many years ago. I think they had an office in Guildford.
They might do. There's a lot of farm around Guildford, and there's a lot of sort of AI and machine learning around kind of Crawley, Gatwick area. So yeah, it's
one of my bad habits is I forget to introduce people and just start talking. So let me introduce you first and give you a chance to give us a little context. So Mark Bjornsgard from Deep Green.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Not bad. I've heard a lot worse.
Okay. I'm trying. And you're calling from the UK, of course. So why don't you give us kind of a few minutes of context?
I'll give you
of who you are and all the good stuff, and
we'll go from there. I mean, I'll keep the sort of history brief, but I up until about a year ago, I was running a venture capital firm that I built and had a number of exits. We sold a healthcare business in the US called to GSK, and we had a bunch of other stuff, but we're really energy folk at heart. And about 7 years ago, we were working for a large energy company in the UK called British Gas, and we built a very, very crude prototype of what everyone now understands as a data furnace, as in the ability to capture computers. Fast forward 3 years ago, that business grew and became a business called Heater. But I felt there was a commercial opportunity, so I actually bought us out of that. And then about a year ago, we invested quite heavily in our first edge data center with heat recapture. So that's what. Okay. So in March this year, we announced that we were heating a public swimming pool in the UK. About 60% of it, and we're giving the heat away for free. So we're saving that public swimming pool about £22,000 a year, and we've literally built a supercomputer in the plant room of the public swimming pool. And this was a for instance a proof of concept to say to kind of prove out the economics. Prove out the kind of the operational and the industrial kind of capability of what we were doing, and then suddenly we were famous across the world. Suddenly we were trending number 2 on Twitter. We were so for 4 hours I was on TV, national TV news. So my face for radio. I go to data center conferences, and now we kind of get high-fived as the kind of pool guy.
Yeah.
So this was. And 7 years ago, you couldn't get arrested doing this, right? I mean, 7 years ago, heat recapture or energy efficient, or no chance. But of course, the world's changed. Right. Edge computing is a reality. The robots are taking over. Energy is expensive, and pricing is going crazy in Europe. So here we. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let me. I do want to dig into that. Let me ask: have you always been involved in sort of the energy space? I mean, even. No. What was your journey to get to be this energy rock star that you were talking about?
Yes, ironically, rock star is the right word, because I did have a misspent youth playing in, and so I started off my career as in the music business. I'm a history and politics student.
Oh, cool.
I'm a troublemaker by
Right.
I'm a troublemaker by nature, and but we are quite anchored in energy. So I've invested in large industrial heat stores. So these massive thermal stores where you basically heat aluminium and rock to like 400 degrees in a perfect vacuum. That business is scaling. We sold a EV subscription business to BCA, British Car Auctions, a couple of years ago. So we're energy folk, and we've sort of learnt our data center craft. Yeah.
Oh, I see. But did you play actually in a band?
Oh yeah. There's proof of it out there. Yeah, there's us supporting a band called Morcheeba in Germany in front of a. Oh yeah.
Nice.
It's.
I know there's a lot of folks in tech that are in music.
Well, I noticed the guitars. I couldn't help notice. Yeah.
And almost everybody I have on
It's
the
odd, isn't it?
podcast has some background in music.
I know it's strange. I think we're naturally sort of curious types, maybe.
Maybe, or it's the math or something. I don't know what it is, or the structure, or the lack of structure.
Maybe.
But no, that's cool. I think it's great, actually, just as a sidebar, that to exercise different parts of your brain, right? So, for me, like tech, and then on the weekends, I'll do something totally analog or whatever, and just you got to kind of balance it.
100%. Yeah, you definitely live a dull and less creative life if you, as you say, if you don't give yourself space to. We recorded an album back about 20 years ago, and it spent 20 years in my loft, and then eventually about 2 years ago, my wife said, I've had it on the to-do to mix the album, and we did it with a really big time producer, a guy called Ian Grimble. So about 2 years ago, we finished off the album. So we finally got something on Spotify. Nice. So yeah, I agree. It's everyone, you might think of it as a distraction, or you might think of it as a time sink, but actually it's not true at all. Of course, it makes
it's important. It's just like physical exercise, some
100%.
creative exercise, is good balance. So anyway, that's the PSA for today, I guess. But anyway, so let's get back to the nuts and bolts of this thing. I mentioned this to someone. I had lunch with someone from NVIDIA on Friday. Nice. I said, I'm going to talk to this person about, taking the heat from data centers and heating pools and stuff. And she was like, what? How does that work? So now, of course, I hadn't really dug into it with you yet. So, but I think actually to take a step back before we get into the how it works thing, because I think people will be fascinated about that. I published and I think this is probably how we got connected. I published a paper, an edge note, as I call it, and some TikTok videos about what I called AI's environmental Armageddon, and sort of sort of this insatiable desire for AI workloads and high performance computing, coupled with kind of a lack, basically, of environmental resources to power those workloads and all those cat poems and other things that we're trying to do. And so that's that's just an inevitable collision that we're having. And I actually published an episode today with Qualcomm talking about low power silicon.
Yeah.
And so when you step back from it, and I think in the video I talked about, there's a number of, probably 5 or 6 or 7 different things that need to happen to solve the problem. Low power silicon, better, transmission infrastructure, the ability to actually measure, the power that's used for workloads. But, the other part too is just fundamentally in terms of constructing and deploying high performance computing or edge computing that's doing AI workloads, just doing that in a different way. And I think that's where what you guys are doing is pretty interesting, because it's really almost flipping the whole model on its head.
Completely other.
As opposed to so for folks that maybe don't know, when I've been to Azure data centers, they're like these giant, 10 football fields of concrete out in the middle of nowhere with just, 1,000 miles of cable and blah, 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 every superlative you can think of. And it's cool, but it takes, you have to run a ton of power to it, many megawatts and 100 megawatts or whatever. And then you have to, cool the thing because you're running these fantastic NVIDIA chips, as we were talking about, at very high temperatures. And so it's a thing. And then that was all well and good until we realized that there's just not enough power and water to actually do this. And so maybe you can kind of dig into where you're seeing this from. And because I know you're also from the UK perspective, it'd be good to hear. I mean, in the US here, we can talk about data centers and big things in Texas and Arizona and stuff, but there's no Texas and Arizona in the UK. So
no.
As far as I can
No,
tell.
you basically hit all the high notes of the challenge. And
Right.
and as you say, we've been planning this for 7 years, and we are looking at completely the other end of the telescope. And when you do that, all of these perceived challenges kind of become opportunities. Now, of course, you'd expect me to say that, but if you take simple things like low power chips. Well, if we can capture 95% of the heat, which we're doing in Exmouth, do we really need lower power chips? Actually, if what we're doing is using the electrons twice. So we're using the electron for the compute, and then we're using the electron to heat the pool. Actually, that becomes
the hotter chips might be better.
Well, exactly. We actually like inefficient chips. And then you take power, and the grid. Our grid is, I think, probably as constrained as yours. When you decentralize, I mean, if you run a 100 megawatt data center, you need 220 acres of solar, right? It's never going to happen. So when you do it like this, and you actually break up the data center, and you actually then realize that you've got plenty of solar on site, car parks, solar, roofs, whatever, to then power the data center. So then again, you take with batteries and solar, you pretty much take the data center off grid. So and then the really interesting thing is that since our moment of fame in the spotlight, we've had something like 7,000 megawatts of committed capacity sign up, right? But that's all with wire in the ground. We don't have to do anything to the grid. Right. We don't have to upgrade a substation. We don't have to lay any more cable. It's all there. So yeah, if you look at it from the other end of the telescope, you sort of suddenly think, actually, this is the solve, essentially, because you start to say, well, actually, you know what? In the Europe, heat pumps don't really make much sense at the moment. Electricity is still more expensive than gas. But if you use the electrons twice, turns out we can make heat pumps super efficient. So that's where we're sort of anchored. You kind of take all of the perceived challenges of what people are fretting about as challenges, and then when you say actually the opportunity is everywhere that you can reuse heat, you actually say, well, actually there's hundreds of gigawatts of available capacity. Yeah, we just build it in the right place.
I guess the challenge, though, the inverse of that, just to put the other hat on, is you're deconstructing the data center into smaller chunks. Yeah. And, there's an argument that if you have all of these disparate pieces out there and they're not all fully utilized, then, you've got a room full of H100s that maybe aren't fully used in one area that should be used in another. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Shuffling the low workload is very much part of the plan. But actually, we know that we've had virtualization, we've now got Kubernetes, and now we're going to WebAssembly, and so actually we know that the software layers are actually going to do quite a lot of the heavy lift in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to make our assets much more, all of its, Kubernetes and WebAssembly, it's like it's compostable, right? So actually what we assume will happen, and I think we're already seeing it to some degree, is that actually your asset utilization becomes much better because you can stop shuffle workloads around. And so that's definitely part of the plan, which is, and then what the great thing is, you don't have 10,000 H100s stranded in some data center where you can't actually use the heat. You can actually start to, and we know NVIDIA really well, and I think they're particularly excited about what we're doing in terms of inference. Smaller instances of AI. So you're absolutely right. It is the challenge now, but I think if we're in front of the puck, we kind of can see actually decentralizing is actually again a better thing to do, because you can actually just sort of shuffle loads around.
Yeah, no, it does give a lot more agility and put the capacity kind of where it's needed as well, and then and modularize it. Definitely. I mean, I think so that I think that's one of the discussions is where is it heading? I think now that you have a much better orchestration layer, like you said, you can sort of load balance these workloads and plop them down across this kind of more of a virtualized data center than a centralized one.
Yeah, serverless.
The question was around inferencing versus training. Yeah. So, right now there's a tremendous amount of demand for training. Yeah. Training. Yeah. And training's hard, right? And it requires lots of big chips and lots of compute. And that's kind of the essence of what has unlocked AI in the past few years is the ability to do this kind of massive training. And then there's the inferencing. And so, there's some folks who are like, well, the big data centers will do the training, and then the kind of the edge data centers can do more inferencing. But are you doing any, actually doing AI training in any of these?
Yeah, I mean, Exmouth is 56 A100 cards. There's about £1 million worth of NVIDIA kit in Exmouth Leisure Centre. And that is doing exactly that. Yeah, it's being used by Civo, one of our brilliant partners called Civo, another brilliant partner called Alsys Flight, who are both kind of high performance compute specialists. So yeah, absolutely. And now our next wave of sites will be doing a 14 megawatt district heating system. So that's kind of training, right? You can land a pretty meaty kit in a 14 megawatt tent, all the way through to the next wave of pools, which are kind of the smallest are at 200 kilowatts. So
I see.
Yeah, that's where our kind of estate, we imagine, will be used. And the reality is most normal data don't want this workload, right? It sucks up all your power and cooling. It's it's a nightmare for most of them. So actually, we're seeing, crazy. So the day we became famous, a very, very large infrastructure fund in Europe rang us up and said, we effectively want to kind of back the business until exit. And that's the deal we've been negotiating. So come the beginning of December, we're going to be announcing, backing for this, so we can roll out at scale, and then we can provide. And look, the reality is, once you land solar and batteries behind the grid, behind the meter, like the costs are just so much cheaper than a conventional data center.
Yeah, definitely.
It's. But the interesting thing about what we're doing as well is that it won't necessarily all be high performance compute. So because it's edge computing, right? Because you're plugged into the edge, actually, we're starting now to see true edge use cases emerge. So, content delivery networks, gaming companies, all the people who
lower latency
proper edge use cases. And I've always been fascinated by this kind of idea that you actually can build an edge network without actually having any edge net use cases. You sort of build it, and then at least edge has got it's got the infrastructure to start to, do what we think it's going to do.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a whole discussion around latency these days, where it's like latency is one of those attributes where if the latency is low enough, then any incremental lowering of the latency doesn't really have any value. So, I've talked to a lot of companies where it's like, well, we're, instead of 50 milliseconds, we're 5 milliseconds. Yeah. It's like, well, but 50 milliseconds is plenty. Then.
It does depend. It depends on the workload. It certainly does. Workload.
But CDNs is a good example where you definitely want stuff close to the action.
Well, and I think 90% of the people who've gotten, who we're partnering with now are anchored on the ESG bit, the carbon bit, because in Europe certainly we've got there's a ton of legislation now coming over the next kind of year, months, where you just if you're not reusing the heat, you're not actually taking care of the carbon in this equation. Yesterday it was announced in UK that the prioritization of whether you get a power connection is now going to be based on a number of factors, including whether you are a sustainable, sustainably baked into your proposition. So, the stick, there was a really nice phrase somebody used on a panel I was doing earlier, which was like the carrots and the sticks are just going to get bigger and bigger, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, I think in tech, sometimes we lean toward, the market forces to solve everything, which, usually doesn't work in the long run. But I think in this case, you definitely need some guardrails for the better public good to sort of make sure people are incentivized to do the right thing, even though I'm sure they would do it anyway in their heart. But it never hurts to have a little bit of, like you said, carrots and sticks that are large carrots and sticks.
Well, Germany
to do that.
Yeah, Germany by 2025, you won't be allowed to build a data center without starting to reuse the heat. So this is becoming very real. CSRD, which is legislation again. It will. As of May this year, if you run over 100 kilowatt data center, you've got to report your carbon. So over the next 3 to 5 years, certainly in Europe, I don't know as much about the US. I'm sure you have
Yeah.
a better view, but certainly in Europe, this,
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to become,
Well, certainly the reporting of the usage. I mean, that's something that's missing, and
yeah,
so it's one of the points is we don't instrument
no,
very well to understand power consumption, water consumption. It's all very obfuscated. And I think that would be huge. Like if people went to ChatGPT and saw for each query,
yeah,
it's like in the US, we had this thing called Energy Star, which is like when you buy a
yeah,
fridge, it's like, oh, this
and
uses like $4 a month, whatever. If you had some sort of Energy Star for AI where it's like, well, this cat poem is going to cost you like 3 trees
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah,
then I think, companies and other folks would be able to measure like how much, environmental resources am I really consuming based on the AI workloads that I need to run.
mm,
And that's where you can start to say, well, maybe I'll run some of those locally or run them on my PC or, what's the eventually we'll get talking about orchestration. I think we'll get to the point where the energy consumption will be a factor, just like latency will be a
yeah,
factor in the workload and where it's run. And people will like, let me run this workload as green as
yeah,
possible.
100,
Maybe that's running it at a certain time of the day or on a certain platform,
yeah.
and it'll be optimized for power consumption eventually. But we have to measure
Well,
first to understand that.
I think I'm right in saying Google Cloud already does that. So it's already got, it's already taking half-hour data of, because we all know that even when somebody says I'm buying renewable energy, it's not always green, right? It's only green when
Right.
right. So I think, yeah, that is very much on the cards in the green software movement, in a number of different areas with
Mm-hmm.
business. That thinking. Again, what I know in Europe is pretty well advanced, and yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And look, reality, if you set a net zero target, this,
Right.
what do you do? The embodied carbon, the scope 3 carbon in your data center is, yeah, eventually the stick becomes so big you have to. I mean,
Yeah.
we one client recently that we sort of put a proposal together for. They were spending something like £450,000 a year over 2 data centers, and we're bear in mind we're offsetting at about $75 a ton all of the scope, all of the carbon in the compute itself. So we've taken their bill down by half, but also that's decarbonized, right? That their net zero target is now
Right.
that much easier because IT isn't creating the problem,
Right. Less of a deficit.
Yeah.
So how big are these kind of deconstructed edge data centers? I mean, give us an idea. If I was to see one on the street,
Yeah. Yeah.
is this like a shipping container or is this
Mo-
smaller than
yeah.
that? Is it a
Yeah. I mean,
18-wheeler? What is this?
if it's a 200 kilowatt a site for a swimming pool, a normal kind of what you'd think of as an average kind of public swimming pool, 25-meter swimming pool, it's a container, basically a container on site. But it's very dense. I mean, obviously, we're getting like 100 or more kilowatts of rack. In terms of the density of the. And now I'm at the edge of my technical abilities here, but certainly in terms of the densities you're getting from immersion cooling, you're way better. So you're squeezing a lot of compute into a very much smaller space.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like a shipping container ish for a swimming pool, and then for these the larger ones, I mean that's 200 kilowatts is probably not enough to do
No,
training per
yeah,
se. So if you want to do like a multi-megawatt one, is like
it's a lot of
it's
shipping
obviously
containers.
bigger than
So
that.
yeah, Bark, the 14 megawatt site, which starts as a 6 megawatt site,
Yeah.
that's like 10, 15 shipping containers, racked and stacked with a frame
Right.
around them. But
And those would be built like near housing where the heat would be used more for housing.
yeah, that's a district heater. Yeah, so exactly that. They have so this particular development is 10,000 flats. They've got a temporary energy center at the moment. They're building a permanent energy center, and that is, as you say, a massive heat loop. It's got Europe's largest water source heat pump into the Thames, so it's dragging heat Thames out of the water, and we're priming that heat pump. But again, because it's free heat, people welcome they're welcome with open arms, right? It's just free
Sure.
energy.
And the transfer mechanism is water. So you're basically doing water, heating the water, and then the hot water is then used to
no oil.
That's how you're.
Oil. So yeah. So the
heating
computers,
oil.
but in this particular instance, we can do direct to chip and we can actually do air cooled. But in that particular instance, it's going to be high performance compute, fully immersed in inert oil. The oil, you don't even have to pump it around. A convection current starts, and then that convection current just feeds it through a heat exchanger. So it's it's very simple. I mean, one of the reasons we did Exmouth in the way we did it is because we wanted to show how simple it was. Without doing a disservice to the amazing work that the technical teams have done, it's just a tub of oil with computers in it and a heat exchanger.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
No. And so, but I guess the other thing to sort of kind of buy into this whole new process, like you said, it's looking at the other end of the telescope. It's really taking a different strategy toward, kind of data center build out. So for the hyperscalers, they have to really sort of buy into this deconstruction of the data center, and in order for this to really work, because you can't transfer heat from a data center in the middle of Arizona. It's too far and it doesn't make any sense. It has to be sort of like you're saying, just like the workloads need to be where the action is, the heat needs to be where the action is for it to be transferable.
One hyperscaler in particular is very excited about what we're doing, so we're having really good conversations there. Because I think I think most of the industry is anchored around the fact that at some point, up to 70% of the workloads are going to be at the edge of the network, and so if that's an inevitability at some point in the near future, then actually this whole kind of it's much less controversial, right? It's just okay, well, we'll just do it there now.
Yeah. Interesting. Is anyone doing this in the US yet, or is this still a European?
No. Well, they may well be, and I might be doing somebody a terrible disservice. Not that we know of, but of course your energy market's different. The pricing of energy is different. Right. You've got a lot more space. Menlo Park, there are a few sites that sort of put their hands up when we first sort of spoke, or we first announced what we were doing. So we hope to be your side of the sooner rather than later. But I think Europe is probably leading the charge just because of the nature of our energy market. So
and I'm sure regionally, I mean, around the world, there's lots of energy markets like that. And they, not necessarily the US, but so there are other places outside of the UK. Germany is obviously some stringent.
Yeah, there's a brilliant company called Cloud and Heat in Germany doing it really well. Slightly different model. I think they're charging for the heat, quite technical orientated. And then there's another great company called Carnot in France doing it as well. So they've just started to raise larger sums of money. So they're kind of, you can see the momentum. Well, it was Microsoft's white paper. In 2010, Microsoft wrote the white paper on this. They coined the phrase data. So Microsoft actually set the hair running, if you like. Yeah.
Right. Oh, good. That's a good UK phrase. Set the hair
There
running.
you go. There you go. Gets the dogs in the East End of London. Got the hair running. Yeah.
There you go. Sometimes I use this phrase here, and so I used to work with a gentleman from the UK, and he always used to say "horses for courses."
Yeah, right.
Like you have to have the right thing for the right, and no one would ever know what I was talking about when I said "horses for courses."
Tomatoes, tomatoes.
You know what I'm talking about, but exactly. No, wow, that's fascinating. So it sounds like you're kind of at the center of some new. Pretty exciting stuff. I mean, so how big is the organization you're working with? It's just a few of you in a garage here, or is this like a big thing?
Well, there's 10 of us now. Once we raise, there are going to be a lot more of us very soon. So one of the challenges here is scaling it fast. But that's why a number of people wanted to back us, and we've plumped with a particular type of fund. With a kind of enough recognition in the market that people will understand that that's signaling a kind of proper sea change, really.
Let's see what else. I feel like I've now much better understand what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry I was late as well. Maybe once, and maybe we can come back on and we can do a kind of walkthrough of next wave of sites, and we can kind of do a bit more of a deep dive. That'd be fun.
Yeah, no, I think it would be great to kind of check in on progress on this stuff, and especially in different geographies
Yeah.
as it's coming up to speed. I'm sure, like with you, so the site you mentioned before, the one with the housing, so is that up and running right now?
That will be that, and one pool in Manchester and another pool in
Yeah,
London will be the next wave of our site. So that will take us to about 6 or 7 megawatts,
I
and then
see.
the idea is that we'll scale very very fast from that. So we
I
aim to
see.
be doing 3 or 4 sites a month, and yeah,
Hmm.
so we'll as I say, we got thousands of sites to go at, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it becomes a scale.
Well, these projects, though, yeah, I can imagine these construction projects. I mean, they take a long time. So, I mean, there's a lot of,
Interesting.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, interestingly, we installed Exmouth in 3 days. So it doesn't take. Actually,
Hmm.
the interesting thing about the whole thing is that because you don't have any dependency on power, there's more fibre in the ground in the UK than there is in the whole of North America, and people welcome you on site.
Hmm.
We can actually spin up a site in less than 3 months. The biggest constraint is the network, actually. So yeah, we can build really fast. Yeah, that's a really
Is,
interesting distinction between the normal
hmm.
data center industry.
And is it because also the solution is modular? I mean, are they literally like
Fungible,
these shipping container boxes?
exactly that. Yeah,
Hmm.
build a hard
Interesting.
standing.
Well, I was gonna, yeah, I was gonna say, like in the software world, we're kind of spoiled because we can build things, quote unquote, recompile them, ship them, and update them, and build them every day. But in the real world, where people have to put shovels in grounds and stuff like that,
Yeah,
um, can't really recompile that stuff. So it takes a lot of planning to sort of do things in the real world with real equipment. But I think modularizing it, like you said, makes a lot of sense because then once you identify the site,
yeah.
you've got the power, you've got the connectivity, then it's
You
just a
just
matter
can't
of
handle
kind
it.
of
Yeah, yeah.
snapping them together, as they
Well,
say.
that's pretty much what we spent 7 years doing. That's the challenge. It's making sure you can
Right,
just crank the handle on them really. So all contracting, all paperwork, all legals, all the spec, it's all fungible,
right. It's
all it's
turnkey. Yeah.
turnkey, and you just can then apply a playbook into sites. You
Hmm.
can be super fast about it.
Cool. Well, I look forward to seeing more news
Yeah,
about more
yeah,
of these sites coming live and lots of swimming pools. I guess there's a lot of swimming pools in the UK and indoor swimming
yeah.
pools.
Well,
And
1,500, and we've lost 300 already. So we've
oh no,
half of them are at risk. So yeah.
oh
So
no.
a couple of thousand pools that are yeah. I mean, energy crisis is it's really impacted. So
Huh.
really really important.
It's interesting. I mean, there's a total side note. So I'm in a little homeowners association here. We have like 40 families. We have a community swimming pool.
Right,
We just bought new heaters last year for like 15,000
right.
bucks or whatever. Someday, I mean, maybe these things get so modular and small that it's like instead of buying heaters, we buy a little data center pod,
You will.
run some workloads on behalf of someone, and heat our
Well,
pool.
you will already. I have one fitted to my house, and the business started. With this heater, which was we can hang it on the side of a hot water tank. So it's a tiny little data that
Hmm.
hangs on the side of a hot water tank and heats that whole hot water tank for free. That's where the business actually started. So yeah, that reality is already here. Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Interesting. But you're not commercializing like home data center heater
Heater,
technology right
Go
now.
heater heata.co. If you go to that website, you'll
Okay.
find that already in play. Yeah. That's where.
Wow. This is good. This is a lot. There's a lot of call to action here for all the listeners to
Brilliant.
dig in more, but that's cool, including myself. I think I might go check it out.
Come on, yeah. Well,
That sounds good.
yeah, we're happy to come back on and speak more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely would like to have you back on and check in on progress. But this has been great, super educational. And, we're talking to lots of different folks in this space. Like when we started, there's lots of different ways to help with solve this problem. This is obviously a really fascinating one that seems to be really picking up steam. And we'll definitely be on the lookout for it. Any kind of closing words of wisdom
No,
for our
no,
listeners?
no, certainly no wisdom, but no, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to chat. So yeah,
Yeah.
we look forward to, kind of, as you say, kind of announcements now, kind of thick and fast. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so Deep Green, everyone keep their eye on that and dig into some of the stuff that we talked about. I think it'll be fantastic. Cool.
Thanks so much.
All All right. Thank you so much, Mark.
Cheers.
Talk soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today on the Excelsior Show. Please subscribe and stay tuned for more, and check us out online about how you can scale your edge compute business.